I'm here with my friend Nate today, and he's got the Galaxy S9, and we're going to do a little comparison between that and my Nikon D610. So we're going to do some outside photos in daylight, and then we're going to do some low light photos and some macro photos, and I'll do a comparison afterwards. Straight out of the camera on the S9 looked pretty good, but I did notice a few dissimilarities between that and the D610. This is our first location. This is in the cornfield. This is the shot from the S9, and this is the shot from the Nikon D610. And here's the comparison between the two. So the differences right off the bat you can see is obviously the S9 is more vivid and colorful, and there's a lot higher contrast. This is in part due to it being shot in more of a vivid profile, which in hindsight, I probably could have shot this more in a more neutral profile in the S9. But the differences you can see here are in terms of sharpness. The D610 definitely has an edge over the S9. As you can see, the shot on the left has a lot higher resolution and sharpness than the shot on the right. And the D610 just overall does a better job of noise and sharpening in the images. And now looking into the out of focus elements in the background, the D610 has an obvious edge over the S9, and this was shot at f5 on the D610, so it's not at the widest aperture, but the out of focus elements look way better than the S9. Overall, however, there's not too much of a difference because this is broad daylight. Going to the develop module here, you can see the histogram on the right side. The D610 clearly has an advantage because it's got the higher dynamic range. And moving to the S9, you can see the shadows are clipped, the highlights are clipped. If you want to go in and recover those shadows and highlights, it's not going to work as well as if you had the full frame camera. You can see you can recover a lot more detail with the D610 than you can with the smartphone. But that being said, this is a smartphone with a small sensor. That's to be expected, and the image quality looks great. Moving on to the next photo, this is taken in the barn. This is basically a dynamic range test. So we've got some of the shadows in the photo and some really bright highlights in the window. This shot here was from the S9, and this one is from my D610. And right away you can see the difference in dynamic range between the two. Now the shot on the right was the S9, the shot on the left was the D610. You can see there's a whole lot of difference in the shadow parts of the image and the highlights. You can see it recovers a lot more detail in the full frame camera. Now if we move into develop here, this is the shot from the D610. You can see I already made a few adjustments. I'm just adjusting the shadows and highlights, and you can really bring in a lot more detail with the full frame sensor than you can with the smartphone. Now moving on to the other photo, if I were to try to do the same thing as I did with the Nikon, you can see it really does not work that well. You can't really bring back detail in those shadows. This is in part due to it being shot in JPEG. If it were shot in RAW, you could probably recover a lot more detail. If you go to the histogram, you can see it's clipped on the left, it's clipped on the right. There's really no way to recover that detail. Now moving on to the next shot, we did a little bit of a macro test, and the S9 does a really good job at macro. You can see it got pretty close to this leaf here. And this is my shot with the D610, so pretty similar framing. So obviously with the D610 you can change your lenses, so you can get macro lenses, you can get different lenses with different focusing distances, so it's going to be different based on your lens. But this is also a good test for the out of focus elements in the photo. You can see in the S9 photo, you can see it's a little choppy in the background. The out of focus stuff doesn't look as great. And moving on to the D610, shot at f2, it's really just completely out of focus back there. There's nothing in the background, and it looks pretty good. This next test we did was a shot of fire hoses, and it was kind of a lens flare and a dynamic range test as well. And you can also see kind of the low light performance of the two cameras. Now this shot was shot at ISO 500 on the S9, and this was shot at ISO 50 on the D610. So it's not really a good comparison. It's not really a fair comparison for ISO performance. But you can see the lens flare here up in the corners in the D610 shot. It's pretty well controlled. It's not too bad at all. Seeing as how there's a bright window right there. And in the S9 shot, you can see there's a lot more lens flare, and this could be a problem when you're taking photos with a strong backlighting. And you can see if you zoom in, you get quite a bit of noise in the photo. It's not too bad, but it's definitely a whole lot better on a full frame camera. Now this one's shot at ISO 50, so you can't really compare the noise between the two, but the sharpness definitely looks a lot better. So that's it for the comparison today. You can see the S9 does a really great job, especially in strong lighting conditions, but the D610 definitely has an edge in sharpness and in low light performance, as well as dynamic range. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe and drop in the comments, and I will see you next week.